think you might be on mute, David. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
All right, let me start that over. Part 23 of three-level panel. Obviously, you could tell some people are kind of getting back in the swing of things, but really excited to hear from Alan Stein tonight. Got the fortune of meeting Alan last summer, and obviously, if you've been in basketball for any amount of time, I'm sure you've come across some of his talks, book, or resources of any kind. So I'm not gonna even begin to try to ramble or introduce. I'm just going to kind of let him have the floor, and we'll let him take over the night. So, Alan Stein, it's all yours, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you, DB. I can't wait to tell everyone that Brene Brown opened up for me. That's pretty awesome. I was going to do a talk tonight, and she's as world-renowned as she is, and she was my warm-up act. So that was pretty cool. Thank you for putting her on. To anyone that's watching right now, my goal is to make tonight as interactive as we can and to really make sure that I'm as helpful to you as I can be. And I think the only way I can do that is if we spend more time doing Q&A and discussion-based stuff instead of me just kind of presenting to you. I have a handful of things that I'll open up with that I'd like to share to get started because I do realize that we have a pretty wide spectrum of coaches that come on these things. And, some of you might be newer and younger coaches, and other of you might be grizzled vets. So I want to try to share a few things that I'm hoping both groups would find helpful, but then want to open it up for questions. If there's anything that you believe I can be of service for, or anything that I can share a perspective on that will be helpful to you, please don't hesitate to ask. Like I said, the only reason that I'm doing this call tonight is to serve you guys. The coaching community and the game of basketball on a grander level has been incredibly good to me over my life. And any opportunity I have to share and help and pour into coaches, I always want to take advantage of. So a couple of things, I guess, just to get started. First thing is, there were a few coaching mantras that I learned very early in my career that still help me to this day. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about the work I do, and right now I don't do as much work in the direct basketball space. I do a lot of corporate work. I do some work with coaches and teams of other sports. But one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it is that these principles have very high utility. So the three mantras I'm going to share with you right now, they help me with the businesses I advise, and they even help me as a father of 3 children. The very first thing, and I hope this sets the foundation for every single one of us as coaches, is the mantra that you need to wake up every morning and in some degree say to yourself, it's not about me, it's about you. And you should be able to direct that to anybody in your life. Certainly as a coach, you should be able to look every single one of your players in the eye and say, it's not about me, it's about you. What are your goals and your dreams? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? What is it that you need from me? How can I be of best service to you? If you are a head coach, you should be saying that to your assistants. You should be able to look at your assistants and say, hey, it's not about me, it's about you. I'm very amicably divorced, but if you're still married or are married, you should be able to look at your spouse and say, it's not about me, it's about you. If you are a parent, you should be able to look at your children and say, it's not about me, it's about you. And this is not about devaluing yourself. This is not saying that you are not important and that you don't need to take care of yourself and follow your own dreams. This is just more of a mindset of being a servant leader. And I found that when you have this mindset, you become incredibly attractive to everybody in your life. Your players will have a much higher degree of buy-in and believe in if they know that you are there to serve them, that you are there to pour into them. You are there to help them individually be the best player that they're capable of, while at the same time collectively getting everybody to work together to be the best team that you're capable of. So first rule of coaching and coaching 101 is, it's not about me, it's about you. The next mantra that I learned really piggybacks on that nicely, and that is, you need to learn to connect first and coach second. Has to be in that order. If you try to flip those things around, it's just not sustainable. You need to be able to connect first. So create a connection with your players. Make sure that your players know that you love them and care about them as human beings first and as basketball players second. You know, if they think that the only reason you care about them is because they've got a good handle or can put the ball in the basket, they'll never give you the requisite buy-in and believe in that you need from them in order for the team to be successful. So you need to go out of your way to get to know them on a personal level, and more importantly, be chameleon-like enough to customize your communication and customize your leadership style for each player on your team. Being able to know exactly how to coach each player is vital. You know, every player on your team will have different needs. Some of your players will require more of your attention than others. Some of your players will need more of your time than others. Some of your players you can be incredibly direct with, and others you might have to be a little bit softer with. You might have to put a little sugar on whatever you're going to give them. Now, this never means that you're not honest. You always need to be honest with your players, but the way that you deliver that message can vary from player to player. And this is for a variety of reasons. One, it could simply be age. You know, the way that you communicate with the freshman may be different than the way you communicate with that same player when they're a senior. You know, once they have 4 years of maturity and life and basketball experience, that's going to change the way you communicate with them. Each of your players comes from a different background, you know, the way they were parented, the way they were coached. Each of your players has a different learning style and appreciation style. Each of your players will have a different personality, different interests, you know. So the sooner you can learn how to connect with each and every one of your players on an individual level, then you can really start to do the coaching. And you can only hold someone accountable and you can only coach them to the degree that you've earned the right to with trust and respect. You know, if you build that trust and respect early and you create that connection, you can be pretty hard on your players and it'll still be very well received because they'll know unequivocally that you care about them. And that is vital. And then the last one of these three mantras is when it comes to the behavior of every player on your team, there are only two options. You either accept it or you correct it. There is nothing in between. Every single thing your players do on the court is either something you accept or it's something you need to correct. Every shot they take, every pass they make, same thing with off the court. Every behavior your players show in the classroom is either something you accept or it's something you correct. There is no gray area. So it's important that, you know, as a coach, you establish your core values and you establish your standards of excellence. And that is the code that needs to be upheld. And when your players live in alignment with that code, then they need to be acknowledged and they need to be praised because that which gets praised gets repeated. As soon as they step out of bounds or veer off of those core beliefs and those core standards, then you need to coach them. And you coach them, again, going back to the first two mantras, you coach them in a way that's going to be best received by them. And if you guys can just put those three pillars into place, one, you'll be a much more influential and impactful coach. But two, you'll also make the coaching part much easier because you're going to get rid of a lot of the distractions and the cobwebs and the baggage and the emotions just by sticking with those three things. So what I think would probably be best, so that was kind of like my opening remarks with just some general, you know, mantras for coaching. So why don't I take a deep breath and see if anybody's got some questions, and then throughout, if things go on a little bit of a lull or there's a little bit of that awkward Zoom silence, I'm never short on material. I've got some other things that I can share. But as you can see, I can be like a runaway freight train. I could easily just talk and not take a breath for the next 60 minutes. And I don't want to do that. So I'll take a small virtual bow right now and open it up for any initial questions.
Hello, Alan. Darrell Robinson, head basketball coach at Danville High School in Illinois. How you doing?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm all right. I can't complain. Even if I did, they wouldn't listen anyway.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't care.
So how do you deal with parents on those levels? Is there a way that you look at, like an easier way of dealing with parents?
Oh, I most certainly do. And keep in mind, again, for anyone that's not familiar with my work, so I spent my time as a basketball performance coach. So I want to make sure that I put on the table immediately that I have never been a head coach myself. So anything that I share as far as advice or perspective on being a head coach, I'm sharing through my own lens as an observer and being a part of a team and working for some really good head coaches. So I just want to put that out there because I don't want you, for those of you that are head coaches, I have never walked one step in your shoes, and I don't want to pretend that I have. But I've been really observant to some really good head coaches. So I'll just share some of the things that I learned from them. I got a chance to spend 6 years as the performance coach at DeMatha Catholic High School under Coach Mike Jones, who's, just an absolutely not only phenomenal coach, but just a phenomenal leader of young men. And Coach Jones would be an asset on any college or any pro team's bench for sure. And a few of the things that Coach Jones did brilliantly when it comes to parents. One, he sets the expectations very early, and he does so with very limited ambiguity. He is crystal clear on exactly what the parent's role is and what the expectations will be. So if we look at DeMatha, DeMatha is a private school. They are required to hold an open tryout. So anyone that wants an opportunity to play for DeMatha has to have an opportunity to try out. However, for the most part, and I guess technically off the record, he pretty much knows who the team is going to be each season, but when he has the tryout, once the tryouts are over and the team has been picked, he does two things that I think really help from a parental standpoint. One, he holds an all hands-on team meeting. So that's going to include parents, all coaches, and all players. And that is where he sets the expectation and says, okay, here's what the coaches are going to do. Here's what we expect the players to do. And here's what we need and expect of the parents, and kind of puts a code of conduct in place. And, he keeps these things very simple. And he also makes it very clear at the beginning that, he doesn't want any friction with the parents. This is not him versus the parents. This is him with the parents. As any high school coach will tell you, you want good supportive parents. You want parents that can help make your job as the coach easier. So he lets them know, hey, I care about you and I care about your son. I'm going to do everything that I can to help your son develop to be the best player he can. I'm going to do everything I can to help collectively our group be the best team we can. And here are the things that I need from you as a parent in order to make that happen. Then he holds individual meetings with each player, and he invites the parents to sit in on those meetings. Now, Coach Jones is a big believer that when you get to high school, especially at DeMatha, that in order for you to be a young man, you need to be self-reliant and you need to be responsible for yourself. So he basically conducts the meeting talking to the child, and the parents are simply there to observe and to listen in. And the reason he does this, for any of you that have worked with, especially freshmen, sophomores, and juniors in high school, what you say and what they hear are not always congruent. Right. So, for example, if Coach Jones says to a young man, hey, you're going to play a limited role on the team this year. You're going to be more of a practice player. Here are the things that I need you to do. Here are some areas that I want you to improve. All that kid hears is, I'm not going to play very much. Coach Jones thinks I suck. And then if the parent was not sitting in on the meeting, they would go home and say, hey, mom, hey, dad, I just had my meeting with Coach Jones. He said I suck and I'm not going to play this year. And that's obviously not what Coach Jones said, but that's what the young person hears. So in order to eliminate this game of telephone, he wants the parents to sit in on that meeting so that they can hear directly from him, the role and the expectation for their child. And, he gives the kid or the player an opportunity to share their own thoughts. If they disagree with something, that's their time to voice it. But he makes sure that when that meeting is over, that the child and the parents all understand with great clarity exactly what's expected of that kid and what they need to be able to do. And just doing those two things alone eliminates about 95% of all headaches. And then the other thing he does is he has a pretty standard rule that for parents, one, he's not going to talk to any parents about playing time. He's not going to talk about strategy, and he's not going to talk about other kids on the team. Those are three things that are non-negotiables he will not discuss. Now, if a parent feels their child is not being treated appropriately or fairly, or if Coach Jones makes a comment and it hurts their child's feelings and the parent wants to discuss that, he's totally fine with that. If the parent wants to come in and discuss their child's academic situation, or, talk about potentially playing in college, or, some of these other things, he's always very open and very accommodating. But parents do not get a vote on who plays. Parents do not get a vote on what sets they run or what defenses they run. And a parent cannot come in to talk about another child's parent. And he puts those 3 rules out in the beginning, and he doesn't waver. Those are non-negotiables. He also does a really good job of basically saying, other than exchanging pleasantries, I'm not going to speak to parents immediately before or immediately after a game. Those are 2 times where, one, before, he wants to make sure that he's focused on the task at hand, which is getting the team prepared to play. And that is not the time, 10 minutes before tip-off, for a parent to come up and ask a question about their son's history grade. So he basically lets them know, hey, before games, we're not going to talk other than just saying hello. And then after a game is usually when emotions are at their rawest. And, if a parent is really upset that their child didn't get to play very many minutes, speaking 30 minutes after the game is not in anyone's best interest, because emotions are raw. So Coach Jones will say, hey, this is not something we're going to talk about after the game. And by putting those parameters in place, I can't stress enough, just what a brilliant job he does about heading these things off before they even become an issue. And I can tell you, in my 6 years at DeMatha, first of all, we were very fortunate to have some really amazing parents. I mean, the parents really understood it and they got it. And every once in a while, if there was a parent who you could see potentially could be a little bit of a headache, these rules that he put in place and the grace and compassion at which he shares these rules nipped it all in the bud. I don't remember a single issue with any parent in the 6 years that I was there. And that's not by accident, and that's not by luck. And that's not because magically kids that go to DeMatha have different parents than everybody else. It's because that's the way that he set it up. And, I know that if I did take over a high school program tomorrow, that is one area of what Coach Jones does that I would absolutely try to emulate.
Awesome. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Alan, Colin Wright from Corning Community College. Just wondering, what are some authentic ways that you've seen Coach Jones or other coaches connect with their players outside? You talked about connect before you coach. What are some of the more authentic ways you've seen that, besides a coach just saying, oh, I'm here for you. I got an open door policy. Come talk to me anytime you want.
Well, the first thing is, he recognizes that he wants to be very proactive with that, not reactive. I certainly appreciate any coach that says, hey, I'm here if you need me, my door's open. But especially at the high school level and even at the college level, Coach Jones recognizes that many young people in particular, they don't have the maturity or life experience or emotional intelligence to initiate many of those discussions. It's almost by saying, hey, my door is open. It's almost like you're kind of hiding behind that because you know that no one's going to take you up on that. It's funny because at the end of any of my keynote talks, I tell folks, hey, if there's anything I can do for you, you're welcome to email me. Here's my email address. I've said that to crowds of 1,000 people. And you know how many emails I get in the next 3 days? Maybe 3 or 4. It's the same concept. I'm putting out there this grandiose opportunity to reach out, and this perceived value that, oh my gosh, Alan will answer any question that we have. And yet nobody takes me up on it. And it's very similar with this open door policy. So instead, Coach Jones is proactive, and he's always asking the players questions. He takes a genuine interest in their lives, not just in basketball, but in everything that they do. Certainly, he takes an interest in their academics, but he takes an interest in their personal lives and, wants to get to know their siblings and their parents and what activities do they like outside of basketball. And, so he's always asking them questions. He makes himself available. So he doesn't just sit in the office and say, hey, come in if you want to talk. He gets down on the practice floor early or in the weight room early, and he engages, and he does a great job of asking questions and then listening. I think the number one way that you create connection with any human being, not just coach to player, is by actively listening and asking insightful questions. And, you know, when you can get to make that a habit, then you're going to do so authentically. Another thing Coach Jones does an awesome job of, you know, within the first 5 minutes of any practice, he tries to make sure that he calls each player by their name and gives them a very specific praise or an encouraging word about something that they're doing. You know, so within the first 5 minutes of practice, you will hear your name called, and Coach Jones will look you in the eye and either ask you a question or say something to you, which is really, really important. So, you know, when it comes to authentically engaging with your players and creating this type of connection, we don't need to be flashy. We don't need to try and, you know, reinvent the wheel and come up with some. No, just stick to the basics. You know, show a genuine interest by asking questions, be proactive, listen to what they have to say. You know, just by making eye contact and smiling and having warm body language and nodding your head, you're planting the unconscious message with your players that you care about them on a human level. And once you show them you care about them on a human level, then you can really ramp up how hard you can coach them on a basketball level.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Alan, you want to go on?
Yep, I sure can. So let's talk, you know, one of the things that gets talked about all the time, especially now in sports, is this word culture. And what does culture mean? And, you know, everybody wants a championship culture, yet I'm willing to bet if right now, if I had each of you type in your definition of culture into the chat box, certainly we'd see some similarities. We'd see some transfer and some crossover and some similar words, but I'm willing to bet there'd be some differences as well. This is actually an exercise you can do with your players and with your team. You know, pass out a series of index cards and pens and get everyone to write down their definition of culture and see how much crossover that you have. I think in order to improve something, first you need to define it and you need to get everybody on the same page. You know, if your goal is to create a championship culture and every single person on your team defines it differently, that's going to be really hard to do. That means everybody's kind of swimming in a different direction and we need to get some alignment. And this is not about, you know, creating a rigid definition that everybody can recite on memory as if they're some type of robot, but it's just making sure that your team understands what you're talking about when you say the word culture. I'll give you my definition, or at least my connotation of it. I believe culture is the intersection and the alignment between your beliefs and your behaviors. So you've got your core values and what you believe as a coach and what you believe as a team. And then you have what you and your players and your staff do on a daily basis. And those two things better be in alignment. You know, if you talk about these being your standards and your core values, and yet folks are constantly behaving in a way that's not congruent with that, then you have a very weak culture. And it's also the experience that everyone has. You know, if I were to interview each member of your staff, what's the experience they have being a part of your team or being a part of your school or your organization? If I were to, you know, interview each of your players, what's the experience that they have playing for you or being a part of your school or organization? And that's usually going to be directly correlated to your beliefs and your behaviors. And most importantly, culture is what you do consistently. It's not what you do when you feel like it or what you do when you want to. You know, it's not how your players behave when the coaching staff is watching. Your culture is heavily defined by what they do when no one's watching. You know, how your players behave in the classroom is a direct reflection of the culture that you've created. So in some way, shape, or form, it's just important that everybody on your team knows here with great clarity are the beliefs and the values that we have as a team. And here's the way that we behave regularly. And this also goes back to that accept it or correct it. You know, anytime someone is not living out your core values and standards, that means they're doing something that is counter to the culture you're trying to create, and that needs to be corrected or that needs to be coached. So when we look at culture, there's three pillars to culture that will dictate how successful you guys are. The first is role clarity. I just mentioned the clarity we need when we're communicating expectations to parents. It needs to be the same thing with your players. Every player on your team needs to know their role, needs to embrace their role, and needs to do everything they can to star in their role to the best of their ability. That will be a very easy sell to your starters. That will be a very easy sell to your six man, or, you know, whoever your first or second option is on offense, because that's the role everybody wants. The hardest roles to sell are, you know, man 9, 10, and 11, or man 15. You know, hey, I need you to come to every workout, every film session, every weight room session, every game, and bust your butt, and you're not going to play very much. That is a very tough role to sell, whether you're at the high school or college level, but that is a very important role. You know, every team needs, you know, those role players to buy in and be the best that they're capable of. You know, if you want your team to be successful, yeah, you need to have a pretty good point guard. But if you want your team to be successful, you need to have a backup point guard that embraces that role and takes pride in being the backup point guard. You know, yes, they still want to compete and get a chance to start. You know, if the point guard, the starting point guard gets hurt or is ineligible or whatever, they want to be able to step in and fill that role. But I want them to say to themselves, you know what, I'm going to be the best backup point guard in our conference. I'm going to be the best backup point guard in the state. You know, I'm going to be the best backup point guard in the country, because I'm going to do everything in my power to make our starting point guard the best that he or she is capable of. And when you can get players to buy in and believe in with that type of fervor for their role, now you've got something special. The next level of that is making sure that everyone else on the team respects, values, and appreciates everybody else's role. You know, I want your best player, or in this case, your starting point guard, to have a very strong appreciation for the 15th man. Being able to say with empathy and compassion, you know, I get to play a lot. I start every game. I play most of the game. I got the green light to shoot. I want to make sure that I'm showing some love to the 15th man that doesn't even get to play very much. And when you've created that type of role clarity, then you've got something special. And I believe that's one of the hardest parts of coaching, is to get players to buy into roles that they necessarily wouldn't choose for themselves. And being able to say, look, I know this isn't the role that you want, but this is the role that I need you to have in order for us to be successful. And if you're willing to sacrifice some of the me for the we, then we have a chance to be really, really good. So role clarity is important. The next pillar is accountability. Make sure that everyone on your team knows that holding them accountable is something that you do for them. It's not something you do to them. Make sure your players know that the reason you hold them accountable to those standards and core beliefs is because you care about them as a human being. You care about them as a basketball player. You care about your team. You care about your program. You care about your school, and you care about your organization. And holding someone accountable, I firmly believe, is one of the best gifts that you can give them. So being able to look a player in the eye and say, you know, I'm going to get on you because you're not giving your best effort, and you should be thankful that I'm getting on you, because I'm showing you that I care about you. I'm showing you that I believe that you're better than what you're showing me right now. And I care about you, and I care about us so much that I'm not going to let you get away with giving anything less than your best. And that usually, especially at the high school level, is what they will come back 10 years later to thank you for. Is they'll say, man, were you hard on me? And I really, you know, it was really tough to play for you when I played for you, but now I can see why. You know, you made me the best player that I could be, or the best, you know, young man or young woman that I was capable of. So many times players aren't appreciative of being held accountable in the moment, but they will over time. And the only reason they aren't in the moment is because they're younger. You know, they don't have the emotional intelligence or life experience that we all have. So that's really important from an accountability standpoint. And you also want to make sure that you create a culture where players feel comfortable holding each other accountable. Now, this doesn't mean that players are critical of each other. This doesn't mean that they coach each other. That's your job. But it means they're willing to hold each other accountable. Nothing would make me happier as a coach than having my team line up to run some sprints, and one of the players stops 3 inches short of the line, and before I can even say something, one of their teammates actually calls them out and says, hey, you know, hey, DB, I saw that you just missed the line. That ain't cool, man. That's not the way we do things here. You need to make sure you touch that line next time. that would show me that, wow, we have created, an incredible culture here. So that really, really is important from an accountability standpoint. And then the last pillar is just communication. For the most part, everything I've shared so far is within a couple degrees of communication. But just make sure that as coaches, you realize that everything you say and everything you do has an unconscious message, and you need to control those unconscious messages. If you are telling your players that they need to take care of their minds and their bodies and they need to be prepared for every practice, then you need to take care of your mind and your body as a coach and be prepared for every practice. Now, the way that you need to prepare is certainly different than the way the players prepare, but you need to make sure from an unconscious message standpoint that you are modeling what you want to see from your players. And communication is so much more than just what we say. Your body language, your tone, the way that you say certain things conveys usually a much more powerful message than what you actually say. So just understand how important that communication is. And that'll even circle back when I was talking about a connection. When you take the time to ask your player a question and you look them in the eye and actually intently and actively listen to their response, you are sending the unconscious message that you care about them and that you value them and that you want their input. Excuse me. The last thing I'll say from a communication standpoint goes back to that concept of asking questions. I'm a big believer that many coaches overcoach, and that you guys do a little bit too much telling and not enough asking. Here's an example that I hope resonates and something you can use. Let's just imagine during a practice, you've got a little 5-on-5, a small scrimmage situation going on, and your point guard comes down and makes a pass to the wing and turns the ball over. A very average coach will blow the whistle, will stop, will berate that player for 20 seconds for making a boneheaded pass, and then we'll then blow the whistle again and resume play. That's not really a great way to teach or to create a lesson that will be sticky that the players will remember. So instead of just telling them why that was a dumb pass or even what they should have done instead, I would rather you get them to take some accountability and some responsibility, and you ask a series of questions. And you can't do this every single time. I'm not implying that during practice, every time a mistake is made, you need to stop and have a 90-minute Q&A. That's simply not realistic. So use these things sparingly but strategically. So if the player comes down and makes a bad pass, blow the whistle and ask them why they thought that was the best pass to make. First of all, concede the fact that they didn't intentionally turn the ball over, that their goal on that trip down the court was not to piss you off. That was not their goal. They didn't say, hey, I'm going to go down and turn the ball over because I love seeing coach get mad at me. At that moment in time, using their basketball IQ, which could be very limited, they thought that was the best pass to make. That's the reason they made it. Clearly it wasn't. So just ask them, why did you think that was the right pass? From your vantage point, what did you see? And then be quiet and let them explain, let them articulate it. Then you can say a follow-up question. Instead of telling them what to do, say, well, now that we all know that that was not the correct pass to make, what's a different decision that you could have made? What's a different pass that you could have made, or a different move that would have probably given you a different outcome? And let them explain it back to you. If they do so, it'll be a much stickier lesson, and they'll be taking ownership. And then what you can do is actually have them run it back using that exact same scenario. So, okay, everybody get where you were. We're just going to rewind the tape 10 seconds and have the point guard make a different decision, and then just continue the scrimmage from there. So by asking your players questions and getting them to do some self-coaching and some explaining, I think you can actually make much more progress as a team. And that all comes down to being a pillar of communication. So let's make sure we have crystal clear role clarity. We hold teams and hold our players to a very high level of accountability for the right reasons, and we communicate effectively, especially with our unconscious messages. And I'll take another virtual bow.
Alan, I'll ask a question this break.
Yes.
Obviously, as you've gone more to speaking towards the corporate side of it, you've probably taken a lot of lessons you've learned from basketball and translated to them. Let's just say hypothetically you came back to basketball. what are some lessons you've learned from the corporate side that you would maybe take to the basketball side?
You know what's interesting, DB, is that it is really amazing how much crossover and utility there is in both directions. And one of the things that I find very fascinating is that most of the folks in the corporate world have a very strong respect and appreciation for what we all do in the athletic world. And they constantly bring in, former athletes or coaches to talk to their businesses. But I don't see the reverse happening very often. I don't see very many high school coaches bringing in a local business owner to come in and talk about things like role clarity or communication, or a college team bringing in one of their boosters that's, created $100 million company to come in and talk about how they actually built that. And I think we're missing an opportunity there as coaches. I think it's incredibly important that we all step outside of just the coaching lens and even just basketball in general, and we try to learn from different areas. I'll say this to any coach listening. How many of you regularly meet with and talk with coaches of other sports at your school? How many times do you sit down with the volleyball coach or softball coach or football coach and talk to them about non-X's and O's stuff, but practice structure or, accountability or team builders? That stuff is really, really important. And then same thing from a business standpoint. And it doesn't have to just be, you're going to try to find a local business owner to come in and talk to your team. They might not be a very good speaker, and that thing could backfire in your face because your kids get bored. But have you read a book by somebody that's not a coach that you learn some lessons from, and you think your team should read that book as well, or a video? I mean, I can't tell you how awesome it is, DB, that, I log on and you're sharing a video from Brene Brown, who, to the best of my knowledge, has never been a basketball coach. I don't even know if she has any basketball experience, but clearly her message and the stuff that she shares is very applicable to all of us. So I was, really, I thought that was really awesome to log on and see you already thinking outside of what most people would consider a very narrow view. So I think that's awesome. But yeah, to answer your original question, there's just so much transfer. We could probably have a shorter conversation talking about the differences between basketball and business, because the list of things that are the same would be a mile long. Gotta love these awkward Zoom silences. I'll give you 10 seconds, and if not, I got some more stuff I can share, so get them while they're hot. Anybody wants to get their cue in here, let's do it. I'll try and have an A.
I'll ask a question.
Oh, awesome. Hey, Trey.
Trey Montgomery from Penn. So one of my biggest questions is what do you, how do you go about coaching transition as far as guys transitioning either from high school to college or from college to their career path? Because there is an identity difference. I know, for example, a lot of guys who grew up and play basketball, football, whatever sport, they ultimately become so enmeshed in that sport that becomes who they are. What do you, how do you go about coaching the mindset as far as transitioning to that next level, whatever phase that may be?
Well, I think first and foremost, I would approach it the exact same way that you just approached asking the question. I think you framed it brilliantly, and being able to tell them, hey, at your age, you most likely solely identify with being a basketball player. But I want to make sure you understand that you are much more than just a basketball player. That is just one spoke on your wheel. And, make sure that you're talking about these other things. Another coaching axiom is that which gets emphasized gets repeated. So make sure that as a coach, you're not just talking basketball with your basketball players, that there is intentional time carved out to talk about life, to talk about interests outside of basketball. At your level, to create a transition program that says, when you leave here, if you're not going to go on and play professionally, let's talk about ways to transition into another area of your life. Or even if you are going to go on and play professionally, for the most part, you'll most likely only do that for 5 to 10 years at most, and then you'll have to make that transition. So I think the more transparent and the more proactive you can be, the better. And then when you talk about that transition from high school to college, again, approach it with an openness, approach it with some empathy and compassion. You know, for the most part, most of the time, a player that's good enough to play in college was one of the better players on their high school team. And usually as a freshman, they're going to take on more of a reserve or a role player. Yes, occasionally you'll get a kid that will be able to step in immediately as a freshman and take on a bigger role. And that's a different conversation. But the biggest transition for most is going from being a starter and someone that had the green light to play a lot to now being a part of a team where you're the low person on the totem pole. And that's not quite the same. And, you know, maybe they went through that when they were a freshman in high school and they realized, well, now I'm a freshman in college, and it's a very similar pecking order. But I just think just you having the insight to ask that question and being very direct and open and honest with your players about both different scenarios is the best thing you can do. You know, it's kind of like when it comes to practice, we all know that the more game-like the drill or game-like the scenario we're working on, the higher the transfer in actual games. We know that. So instead of trying to come up with all these creative drills that mimic the game, why don't we just take portions of the game and put those into practice? You know, Mike Jones does 3 things every single practice. Every single practice, doesn't matter what time of year it is. Number 1, there is always a fundamentals component to practice. They're working on ball handling, they're working on shooting, they're working on passing, they are working on the fundamentals of the game. Now, some practices that's 10 minutes long, some practices that's 40 minutes long, but there is not a DeMatha practice that goes by that there's not some time dedicated to fundamentals. There is always a competitive component to every single DeMatha practice. Sometimes you're competing against yourself, you know, how many shots you can make in a minute. Sometimes you're competing as a team. Sometimes you're competing against a teammate. Sometimes it's red team versus blue team, whatever it may be. But he wants to teach how to be competitive. And then lastly, and this is where I was going with this, there is always some type of game situation in every practice. There is always something that is 5-on-5, time and score. So, you know, red team's playing blue team, red team's up 3, and there's 2.5 minutes left. Here's how many timeouts each team has, whatever it may be. But he wants to make sure that he can take as many real life game scenarios and have players practice that before the lights come on and the cheerleaders start dancing. And the reason I say that is it's the same thing with whatever it is that you're trying to replicate. You know, if you want players to be better at making decisions when they make that transition, then start putting them in positions where they have to make decisions to make that transition before they'll actually have to do it. So come up with as many different game type scenarios as you can to help talk your players through these different things. Instead of trying to invent something off the cuff, just do what it is that they're going to need to do.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Coach, question about Tommy Seawright down here in Gulfport, Mississippi.
I'm listening.
You listen to me. Question about your book. I asked to use your book last year as our team book. Can you talk about how that book came, how it manifested up, you taking your experiences and putting that all down?
Oh, most certainly. No, I certainly appreciate the support of the book. I've been a pretty voracious reader myself since I graduated from college, and I've always had a very strong respect for authors and for books in general. So I've always had on my professional bucket list a desire to write a book. You know, I just thought that being able to share some things that were taught to me, if that could be of help to someone else, that would just be a cool thing to do. So I've always wanted to write a book. When I decided to make the leap from the basketball space to the corporate speaking space, I also needed to get more clarity and get more organized on my content. So writing a book actually helped me as a speaker because it got me to organize all of my content and ideas and stories and lessons. So those are really the main reasons for wanting to write the book. From a more altruistic level, you know, I recognize that I've been very, very fortunate in my career. You know, I'm very fortunate that I had an opportunity to work at Montrose Christian, where Kevin Durant graduated from, for a Hall of Fame coach named Stu Vetter. I was very fortunate to get to spend 6 years learning from and working for Mike Jones at DeMatha. I was very fortunate to see a peek behind the curtain at the Nike Skills Academies and different events for Jordan Brand and USA Basketball. So I recognized that I was able to see some things and hear some things and experience some things that not everyone has been able to do. So I thought the next best thing I could do was put as much of that into a book as possible and pay it forward and share those things. You know, I mean, while the book was certainly written through my lens and my own experience, everything in that book was because someone else mentored me or shared with me or poured into me. And I just want to make sure that I can do that to someone else. That's one of the things that I love most about the coaching fraternity. You know, I know on some level, you know, you're competing against other programs in your conference and you're competing against other people. But at the end of the day, as coaches, we should all be united to help grow the game in and of itself. We should all be united in helping young people, whether they're really young people playing youth basketball or older young people at the college level. You know, we should be doing everything we can to be of service to the players themselves, which means if I have something that I can share with you that will help you grow the game and pour into the young people on your team, I should do that. That's just the ante for sitting at the table of being a coach. And we should all do that to help each other. Now, certainly that doesn't mean you need to email your X's and O's and your offensive sets to your biggest rival. Like, you can keep that stuff under wraps. But when it comes to pouring into young people and helping grow the game, you know, we should be willing to share that with anyone and everyone we can. And the more of us that do that, the better off we'll all be. So really, that was the reason for writing the book. I just wanted to take everything that people were kind enough to pour into me, and I just wanted to keep that flowing and share it with some others.
Alan, Gamali at Helligburg, University of South Dakota. I appreciate you on here sharing with us. I'll kind of follow with that a little bit. Is obviously you started kind of in the basketball space, training and work with a bunch of guys like you kind of spoke on, and now you kind of got into leadership and speaking. What was the reason, or what made you kind of get in that space and kind of leave the basketball space into all leadership and speaking? And do you miss the basketball space now that you kind of got out of it?
I'll go in reverse order. And yes, a part of me does miss the basketball space. And I would say more accurately, more than missing the basketball space, I just miss the direct relationships and interaction with players and coaches. That was always my favorite part. But with that being said, I don't regret for 1 second the decision I made. It was the right decision at the right time, and I'm absolutely loving it. And, you know, I always keep options open. I'm not saying at some point I won't go back to doing something in the basketball space. Who knows? But I just know that after spending almost 20 years in that realm, I had learned so much that I was just ready to take that outside of the walls of the gym and share with other groups. I know too that, you know, from a specific basketball standpoint, you know, that I had learned so much from both of the programs and all of the different people I was with. I wanted a new challenge. I wanted to do something slightly different. I had a chance, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the name Walter Bond. Walter Bond played at Minnesota. I think he's a couple years older than me. Had a quick cup of coffee in the pros, and he is a remarkable professional speaker right now. And he spoke, this probably would have been, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. He spoke at one of the NBA Players Association top 100 camps that I was working. And I just remember being blown away by his talk. And I remember right there sitting there, kind of planting the seed with myself saying, one day I want to do that. One day I want to be a speaker and have an opportunity to move people through different emotions just with my words, to be able to give them some strategies and some things that they can apply to their life. And at the time, I mean, I was all in with what I was doing, but that was always kind of on the back burner. And as I got older and gained some life experience, you know, 4 years ago, I just decided it was time to make that change, and let's go ahead and see if we can make the flowers bloom that Walter planted, you know, 10 to 12 years prior, and decided to make that leap over. But I can't stress enough that even in all of the corporate work I do, the vast majority of everything I share is through the lens of a basketball performance coach. So I don't even really feel like I've left the game, because most of what I'm sharing at the corporate level are stories from basketball, are lessons I learned from players and coaches. So, you know, it's it's pretty cool that I can still stay connected to the game with that. And I'm also a big believer in trying new challenges and taking on new roles and new positions. I never want to get stale, and I never want to get complacent. And I had kind of bounced around and tried some different things, even just within the performance world. I really started my career doing one-on-one training with players, and then went to doing team and group work with players, and then worked training coaches how to train their players, and then started holding large clinics for players where coaches could come watch, and then started doing more stuff on DVD so that could be shared with other coaches. So even in my 20 years of being directly in basketball, I mean, I had 5 or 6 really different niches or ways of approaching it. So it wasn't like I just did one thing for 20 years, but I'm glad that I made the switch, and I've been having an absolute blast with it.
Awesome. Appreciate it. And Walter Vaughn is a good dude. I remember him back in his Minnesota days.
Oh yeah. I mean, he was a great player, and
Yeah.
he's a phenomenal speaker.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course. My pleasure. Thank you.
Alan, Coach Corey Irvin sent one in the chat. She wanted to know, she's watched a lot of your videos over the years. Do you have a favorite quote or thought you've learned in your time?
Well, the one that I guess I get attributed to the most is the one that's hanging up in the Penn State football training center. And that is, are the habits you have today on par with the dreams you have for tomorrow? And, I'm a quote nerd, so I have so many different quotes that I like and so many quotes that resonate, but that one's really important to me because I think it speaks to any of us wherever we are in our lives or wherever we are in our career. And that is, just make sure that the habits and the decisions that you're making today are in alignment with who you want to be or where you want to be tomorrow. And the easiest way, especially explaining this to players, just tell your players, hey, I want you to describe to me, in great detail, the player that you want to become. I want you to explain, like literally paint that picture for me. Who is the player that you want to become? And get them to articulate that. And then just say, okay, well, every decision you make every day on and off the court needs to move you a little bit closer to becoming that player. From who you follow on Instagram to what you eat for breakfast, the decisions you make better be in alignment and pointing towards being that player. And if you do that, it doesn't guarantee that you'll become that player, but it certainly greatly increases the chances. And I could say the same thing to anyone on this call right now. Who is the coach that you want to be? And I don't mean another coach. Who are you trying to emulate? Like, what characteristics do you want to have as a coach? And then just make sure that all of the decisions that you're making are in alignment with that. And if not, then you have to change one side of the equation. You have to either change your habits and change your decisions, or you have to lower your goals. And most people are not willing to look in the mirror and lower their goals, which means you better change the first half of that equation. And, that I find that when you, especially as a coach, when you can get players to connect to that type of mental construct, it makes it so much easier to coach them, because I can say, DB, you told me that you want to be a pro. And I'm telling you right now that the way you're practicing, you ain't ever going to be a pro. You're not anywhere close to doing what a pro needs to do right now. And that's probably all I need to say to get you to refocus your lens and increase your effort and increase your focus so that you're doing a better job. I don't need to curse you up and down or embarrass you in front of the team. I just need to say, hey, man, you told me that you want, if it's in high school, you told me you want to be a college basketball player, and you're not practicing right now the way a college basketball player would practice. That's it. And, it goes back to, once you've created that connection, you actually make your job as a coach so much easier because you create that connection first. You end up, getting rid of all of the distractions and all of the stuff that could potentially be in your way. And it's much, much smoother sailing.
Alan, it's Justin. This is a little bit.
Hey, Justin.
A little bit of a different question, but just kind of thinking from the lens of, I don't even know, teacher, coach simultaneously here. Obviously, 2020 has been a bizarre year and thrown tons of challenges our ways. And, when I'm looking at my kids and talking about the things that are going on in our world, obviously they don't know the answers because nobody really knows the answers. But I guess it's a twofold question. One is, what message would you present to them as the generation that's inheriting whatever the outcomes of what's going on are? And then two, how do you handle that as the adult coach, mentor, whatever capacity it may be, to navigate these kind of uncharted territories?
Well, I always believe in being honest. And I think one of the best things you can do to connect with your players is to tell them when you don't know something or you don't have an answer to something. So what you just did so brilliantly right there is have the humility to acknowledge that some of the questions being posed in 2020, we don't have the answers for yet. And I think it's okay to tell players that. I think, showing them that you're humble, and as Brene Brown was saying before the call started, that you're willing to be vulnerable is a great connection tool. And letting them know that, hey, these are some things that we will figure out together. As we get more information and certain decisions are being made, we will make sure that we pivot accordingly, and we will always keep ourselves open to what's going on in the world, and then we'll make the appropriate response to that. So first and foremost is just be honest with them. I'm also a big believer that you should put your energy in and focus on the stuff that you want to see more of. So yes, there is no shortage of some really tough things that have happened this year. All of us could list them, rattle off a list of those things immediately. But there's also some pretty good things that are coming out of this year. There are some silver linings if you look hard enough for them. And this does not mean being naive or being Pollyanna and ignoring the negative. It just means I'm going to choose to focus on the positive. If we're going to use a cliched sports analogy, I believe the best way to prepare your players for a game is to make your practices and your workouts really challenging and really adverse. Really push your players mentally, physically, and emotionally during practice so that the game almost becomes a treat. Well, if you look at it through that lens, it's actually a good thing that 2020 is so tough. We can look at 2020 as the hardest workout we've ever had, which means we're going to come out of this stronger than we've ever been. We're going to come out of this with new skills and new mindsets that we didn't have before. So one thing I would say is most people think the generation that comes after them is soft. I know my parents thought that about us. My generation thinks that about you. That's just the natural pecking order. Where I think things are going to be a little bit different is I certainly hope that the adults of the world now have a newfound respect for what young people are going through, because I do think that they have it the hardest. Yes, there are adults that are getting sick and adults are getting furloughed and losing jobs. But you have to remember, those adults also have adult life experience and maturity and emotional intelligence to deal with those problems. The young people we're working with, I try to put myself in their position. If you would have told me that my senior year of basketball was going to get canceled, I didn't have the emotional intelligence back when I was that age to deal with that. I would have been an absolute basket case. So I've got a lot of respect for how well young people are handling these things. I know every single area is different, but here in Montgomery County, Maryland, I'm 30 minutes north of Washington, D.C., fall and winter sports have already been canceled. That is a non-negotiable. There will be no football or basketball season this year. That is tough. And I only hope that the kids that have to go through that, especially those that are seniors and their last go around was cut short, they're going to come out of this with a grit and resilience that we've never seen before. And they should be commended and applauded for that. We as adults should be doing everything we can to support them and to make sure that they're kind of come out of this with, mentally healthy. That's my biggest worry right now, is the mental health effect that this is going to have on young people. So instead of bagging on them and talking about how their generation is softer, I think we should be lifting them up and saying, man, you guys at your age are going through one of the toughest things that I've ever experienced in my life. And boy, are you doing it with your head up, and you're doing a great job. So I think that if handled correctly, this could be a really special generation. The kids that are teenagers right now are going to be a pretty special group, when this whole thing is over. And I'll piggyback with that just to go a little bit more. And I know this is very congruent with what you believe, Justin, and we share some mutual friends and some people that share something very similar to this. But it's this concept of, we as coaches and as adults need to do everything in our power, especially now, to get rid of complaining, making excuses, and blaming other people, or blaming, what's going on in the world. Those are very easy defaults right now. There is no shortage of things that we could all complain about. Pandemic aside, even if you get rid of COVID, we've each got 4 or 5 things that we could easily complain about going on in the world right now. There are plenty of reasons we could make excuses for things, and there are plenty of things that we could blame others on. And I use absolutes very sparingly, but blaming, complaining, and making excuses will never, ever improve your situation. They will never, ever make things better, and they will never, ever move you forward. So when we can learn to get rid of those 3 things as adults and model that for our players, then we can hold them to that same level of accountability and do our best to make sure that we create a culture that doesn't tolerate complaining or blaming or making excuses. Now, we all have to have the humility to acknowledge that we're not perfect and that we're all fallible, and that at some point, each and every one of us is going to complain about something or make an excuse or blame someone, and our players are going to do the same thing. The question is, do we have the awareness to catch it quickly and not let it fester? Can you catch yourself complaining and 30 seconds later go, oh, there I go again, I'm complaining, this isn't going to help. So now let's be more resolution based instead of complaining based. And when you can create that type of culture and atmosphere, then you've got something really special. And to me, that can be your superpower right now during this very challenging year. If you can be one of the very small handful of people walking the planet that can inoculate themselves from complaining, blaming, and making others during arguably the most trying year that any of us have ever lived through, then you're doing something really special. And I know for me that's one of my main focuses right now is to mitigate those 3 things. I try to wake up every day and say to myself, I'm going to do the best I can with what I have, where I am. I'm a professional keynote speaker. For the most part, my business has been upended significantly over these past 7 months. And I can complain about that. I can blame COVID for that. I can make excuses on why I can't speak, but none of those things are going to help me. So instead, I just say, okay, how can I still be of service to someone else? What can I do, not just to earn a living, but what can I do to pour into others and help others in their time of need? And I know that if I can do that consistently enough, then things will start to course correct. So I am doing the best I can with what I have, where I am. But one thing that I have to highlight, and I probably should have said this at the beginning, every single thing I've shared with you all on this call so far is very basic in premise. My 10-year-old twin sons and my 8-year-old daughter, they'd be able to follow every word of what I've said in the last 70 minutes. They wouldn't be lost for 1 second. Nothing that I have shared with you all, nothing is easy. None of this stuff is easy. If you think for 1 second that it's easy not to complain, not to blame, or not to make excuses, you're crazy, because that's not easy. If you think it's easy to have, crystal clear role clarity with everyone on your team every moment of every day, that is not easy to do. It's basic, but it's not easy. If you think it's easy to set up a framework where you coach in high school and all of your parents are following along in single file order to do everything that you're asking of them, that's not easy to do. So none of this stuff is easy. And it's important going into it knowing that these things aren't easy. Because if you expect these things to be easy, as soon as you hit a little bit of resistance, you're more likely going to give up, or you're more likely going to quit. And we don't want you to do that. And that's the only thing I have to say about 2020. Whoever said that it was supposed to be easy? Whoever said that life's not supposed to have adversities and challenges? Just because maybe the last couple years had been really good in certain areas. I mean, who told you that that's going to continue for the rest of your life? That's just not the case. It comes down to that, when my kids say, that's not fair. I'm like, yeah, I know it's not fair. Who told you that life is supposed to be fair? Because whoever said that is either stupid or they're lying. Those are the only options, because life is absolutely not fair. Each and every one of us needs to play the hand that we've been dealt and the cards that we continue to get. And we need to play them in a manner that allows us to move forward and continue to progress and work towards being the best versions of ourselves. But there is absolutely nothing fair about life. And the sooner you can understand that and actually say it with a smile the same way that I do, then the better off you'll be in moving forward.
Hello, Alan. Darrell Robinson again, Danville High School. I'm okay. My situation is it's kind of COVID related. I came back like I'm from Danville, so I came back more of willing to mentor. You know, a lot of these kids, it's a rough place. You know, where basketball is needed. You know, sports are needed. With this COVID pandemic that's going on, we just started school again, which we start remote learning. Even though like our state kind of passed us to be able to do something, we still can't do anything because of school district. So I can't do anything with the kids, and I'm trying to find another way of just I don't know, kind of like communicating with them outside of texting. That's gonna help us outside of basketball. You got any ideas?
Most certainly. And, you know, what would probably be most helpful is kind of curating the group and maybe getting some of the folks on this call to be able to share some of the things that they've done. But, you know, you said you can't do anything with the kids, but what you actually meant was you can't do anything in person with them on the court. There's still plenty of other things that you can do with them. Now it's just a matter of figuring out, all right, how can we make this happen? And now you may be handcuffed a little bit with some kids may not have access to technology or may not have access to jump onto Zoom calls. So you may have to get creative with certain things. But the key is going back to that mindset of do what you can with what you have where you are. And, you know, it sounds like, you know, you've got a very tall challenge in front of you, that it's certainly not easy by any means, but you can figure out some small ways to still serve them and to help mentor them and to help them improve. Even if most of your focus at present is things off of the court, you know, there's no reason that they can't be developing as leaders and as communicators and as teammates. So maybe their actual on-court skills might get a little rusty because you can't really work on those with the same level of focus or clarity, but you can still help them in other ways. You know, maybe you can say, hey, I'm going to assign some reading or some videos, you know, hey, curate a list on YouTube and say, hey, here's 10 videos that I want you to watch. And, you know, again, if a young person doesn't have access to the internet or a device where they can watch that, maybe you can find a workaround with it. I don't know. But I just know that if what's most important to you is still being of service to them when things are tough, you'll start to figure out some ways. You'll get creative and you'll get innovative and you'll simply do the best that you can. And, you know, I mean, that's really all that you can do. And then the nice part is right now in your situation, that's probably about as adverse as it's ever going to get, which means hopefully over time, things will start to improve and some of these passageways will open up and you'll start to be able to do some more stuff. So if you look at it right now, that this is the most challenging time, if you can still find ways to help pour into them now, it's only going to get better moving forward. So yeah, I would say, you know, again, to your comfort level, I don't know how many other coaches on this call, you know, but maybe see if some of them are willing to drop you an email with some of the ideas that they have. I always believe in trying to curate from the group, because then you'll get so many different perspectives.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Of course, my pleasure.
To be respectful of Alan's time, we have time for one more question if anyone has one.
Because if any of you guys follow me, you got to know I'm already 14 minutes past my bedtime. So, man, this is I'm staying up late.
Science into his own.
Hey, Alan. Lamar
Yes.
Barrett. What's up, man? Hey, been a long time. I remember when you first started. You had, I remember when T. Warren was started in the county. He was at McNamara with Kevin Sutton and Dave. I think Dave brought you along. I think Dave brought you along over at Montrose. But I just wanted to ask, did your path choose you or did you choose your path?
I'd like to believe I chose my path. And I chose my path based on some advice I got when I was really young, which in hindsight is probably the best advice I've ever been given. And it's the advice that I give as many young people as I can. And that is find something that you're pretty good at, find something that you love to do, and then find where those two things intersect. And for me, that intersection has always involved the game of basketball. Certainly first as a player, then as a performance coach, and now even as a corporate keynote speaker. It still involves the game of basketball because that's something that I have been passionate about since I was 4 years old. So here, 4 decades later, basketball is still a major pillar in my life. Now, the things I was good at, that part of the intersection has changed. I was a good enough basketball player to play down at Elon down in North Carolina. But then when it got to the point that I wasn't able to play anymore, then I decided to coach. And then once I decided to coach, then I decided to speak. So I think ultimately I chose my path. And I think all of us have the power to do that, which means continually find the things that you are passionate about, the things that you love, the things that interest you and fascinate you. Continue to develop new skills and talents so you can see what things you're good at. And then, whether that's within the direct coaching world or outside of the coaching world, just make sure you keep navigating through that, because being in your strength zone will certainly increase your chance for higher performance and success, but it'll also make sure you're happier and you're more fulfilled. And ultimately, that's where you'll do your best work. When you really feel like you're making a difference, you really love what you're doing, when you're really in alignment with your strengths, you'll be doing your best work. And that's one of the reasons that I've always just had so much admiration and respect for the coaching fraternity. For the most part, I don't think anyone on this call coaches for the money. Some of y'all might make a decent living from coaching, but that's not the reason that you do it. That's a byproduct of it, but it's not the reason. You do it because you love basketball and you love helping young people. So you guys are good at what you do because you found that intersection, and just keep being in that intersection and staying in that strength zone for as long as you can.
Thanks, Alan.
Always my pleasure. Good to see you, Coach.
Yep.
Well, obviously, Alan, I appreciate your time coming on and sharing with us, and I tried to keep you on that 10 o'clock, but
oh, that's all right, DB. I had a good time, man. You got some great folks on this call. Guys, let me just throw out a little bit of information in case any of you will find this helpful. Email is always the best way to get me, and that's just alan@alansteinjr.com. Because I have my mic plugged in, my keyboard is not plugged in, so I'm going to nominate Justin Beck as my scribe. So Justin, if you want to type any of this into the chat box, just make sure they know that alan@alansteinjr.com is always the best way to get me. If any of you have an interest in my book, you can go to raiseyourgamebook.com. In addition to the book or doing some type of team study, we've got some additional resources and a facilitator guide and a team member workbook if you wanted to do some type of study. If you think I can be of value speaking to your team or even to your entire athletic department or school, just drop me an email. And then some of you may have seen, if you go to makeyourgameplan.com, I recently released a program for student athletes. And next week, I'm going to release a version for coaches. So if the stuff we've been talking about and sharing tonight, if you found helpful, I hope you'll find your Game Plan Coaches Edition equally beneficial. And we're going to create some bundles where you could buy a team package and you get the coaching program for your coaching staff and you get the student athlete program for your players. One of the things that I believe Coach Jones does a brilliant job of is he was never afraid to let others have a voice with his program. He understands that everything that goes on at DeMatha needs to be one voice conceptually, but he always wanted to bring in other people to reinforce the things he was sharing. In fact, that was the reason I was able to work as the performance coach, is he wanted to bring in someone else to take control of the performance work so that he didn't have to do it, so that his voice wouldn't get numb. And the reason I say that is hopefully the makeyourgameplan.com or my book or even me speaking to your team, I would only want to do those things to help reinforce and strengthen your voice as a coach, so that your players will hear me say something and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's exactly what coach tells us. And now that they're hearing it from a variety of different directions, it's going to make it stickier. And of course, the funny part is I might even say something that you've been saying for 2 years, but for some reason they've been tuning you out. And as soon as I say it, they start to listen, which, we can all kind of chuckle at least they're getting the information. I mean, I always laugh that even though I've had pretty good experiences in basketball, in a couple years, I'm going to have to hire a trainer to train my own children because they won't listen to me at all. You know, I'll just be dad. They'll be like, what does dad know? He has no idea. And I'm going to hire a trainer to basically tell them the same things that I would tell them as their dad. So I think as a coach, when you can step outside of yourself and bring in other voices to emphasize and reinforce your message, it'll only make it stronger. So makeyourgameplan.com, raiseyourgamebook.com, and Alan at Alan Stein Jr. DB, thank you so much, man. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your persistence. I know you've been hitting me up for a little bit and schedules just never quite worked out. So thank you so much for creating this, man. I have so much respect and appreciation for you, and to everybody that invested your time tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Alan, and obviously thank you again, everyone, for being on tonight.
Hey, Alan, really fast, DB, let me ask him something. Alan, Nate Dixon at UMBC. Good to see you, bro.